Hello. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, you know I'm a baseball fan, and I've been watching some great stories where people talk about getting to play with their heroes, with the people who helped inspire them to be baseball players. I get to do something like that today because I never had a single thought about becoming a podcaster until I was dealing with my mother's illness and I was driving across the country to California and I needed someone to help keep me company. And I liked Marvel movies, so I found this thing called the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. And I probably listened to 100 of their episodes over a month, and it kept me company. And eventually I decided to become a podcaster myself, and I wrote into them. And now they're kind of the reason why I'm a podcaster. So whether you thank him or blame him, say hello to Matthew Carroll, my guest today, as we talk about Star Trek, one of the founders of the MCU podcast and the Stranded Panda podcast network. Matt, how are we doing today?
Hey, Matthew. I'm doing well. That's way too kind of an intro. But I will self-deprecatingly spin it as you just finally listened to a podcast that made it look easy enough. That's the thing that we do. We do a very loose conversations over there that are just guys talking. So hopefully, and I truly believe, like, to me, I've said this before, and it sounds almost cynical, but for me, podcasting is like kind of performing a friendship for an audience. Not that the friendship isn't real, but you're just like putting it out there. Like, these conversations are things I've been having since I was 6. My buddy Dave, who I do the Star Trek podcast with, which we're going to be talking about Star Trek here. We're 6 years old, walking around the church parking lot, having these kinds of conversations. Obviously, hopefully they're elevated past my 6-year-old self, but like, we were having deep conversations about what would happen if this happened in Star Trek and this and this and Star Trek and DC and Marvel and all that stuff when we were 6 in the parking lot. And now I still talk to him every week about every time there's a new episode of Star Trek.
Right. So. Well, I love that. And that's a much better spin, because the way I've described it is Paul and I are so narcissistic that we think everyone wants to listen in on our conversations about the things we love. So, you've got a better way to put it, but either way, that's the goal. It's just a couple of friends talking about these things. And I love what you talk about there with the church parking lot, because, well, I do a Star Wars podcast, and you and I will kind of jokingly get into the back and forth between those two. I've often said that my idea that media, especially science fiction, is more than just cool spaceships and laser guns or laser swords, but is also ethical questions and morality and character studies. That comes from watching the original series of Star Trek with my mother and her asking things like, this planet where some people have faces that are black and white and others have faces that are white and black. What do you think? How does that connect to, the real world? So I love that that's kind of a shared thing for both of us. And
absolutely.
So now that we've a new Star Trek show has finished, Starfleet Academy is fully out, all 10 episodes. I've been listening to you guys talk about it on your Star Trek podcast that we'll definitely give a shout out for, and there'll be a link in the show notes for where to find it. But I knew I wanted to get you on because this is a great show that raises a lot of great ethical questions that we'll get into with a good deal of spoilers. So if you want to hit pause and watch it, it's only 10 episodes, strong recommendation.
Yeah.
But also, there's a lot of ethical questions about the making of it and why it's looked likely that it's going to have a second season, but no more. And what that means for us as fans, as certain people with certain political agendas become owners of the things that we care about and love. So let's start with the show itself, though. Give a quick overview. Like, what is Starfleet Academy?
Oh, well, it is set in the distant future of Star Trek after it's sort of a spinoff of the show Discovery, but you don't got to know any of that. It's in a time where Starfleet has fallen apart because of a calamity, and they finally are able to rebuild Starfleet Academy and Starfleet itself. So it's about them putting together not just Starfleet Academy, but also rebuilding the Federation and starting to deal with worlds who had been exiled from the Federation and who were no longer friends because they had a time of, like, I forget how many years the burn was, but it was a number of years where space travel became harder, and therefore they weren't able to complete their mission like they used to. They weren't able to be the beacon of Star Trek is all about a post-scarcity world where you can you just have to, if you can just work out your differences, everyone can be fed and everyone can be taken care of. But basically they went through a period of scarcity, and that caused them not to be able to fulfill their mission. And now they're rebuilding the Federation, and it's about a group of students who go to Starfleet Academy, and it was a lot of fun. It sounds very Hogwartsy, and I think in many ways it is, but I think it's really good, and it has a really great emotional core about the main character, at least of the first season,
Right.
with Tatiana Maslany as his mother, which was just a gift.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really
and
great.
it starts out better than Hogwarts, because if you watch it, you're not giving money to fund anti-trans hate. But also, I get you like that, and I'm different than you. I like 90210. I like shows that are about drama, and I was kind of excited for that part. And there's a little bit, but there really isn't too much. It really is the focusing on those questions, but also from the perspective of people who are coming at it from a new place. And my mother was, as I said, a huge The Original Series fan, and she wasn't as much a fan of TNG because it just wasn't what she knew. But she and I had some great. She would love to tell me about, like, she would explain to me the '60s by explaining the hopefulness of the original series, and that the post scarcity, post religion, post all these things world. And then we like talking about how that was like that show was a good way to understand the philosophy of the late '60s. And the TNG show, and then later DS9 and Voyager, like that's a different time, and there's different feelings people have. And we're talking about post scarcity, but we're talking about different kinds of questions in ways that I think reflect the '90s quite a lot, late '80s and '90s. What do you think this show is doing in terms of, like, how would you say this show is reflecting the moment we're in right now in the early and mid 2020s?
While we here in America haven't gone through a scarcity time, we've gone through a scarcity mindset in politics.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a real a lot of the show is about the war college, and this isn't really as much in this show. I should there's I don't know what I'm saying. The adults on the show are very much like still finding that balance between who can we still help, who can we not help, how much do we have to give. There's still a little bit of scarcity going on, and I think there's a lot of that in our and there's a main character, Captain Ake, who is very much like we need to be for the Federation again. We need to do all the things we used to do. We need to be open-hearted and open to everyone, and as caring and as giving as we can be. And other people are kind of pushing back on that. And I think there's definitely something of that in our politics today for sure.
Yeah.
And also it's just pushing forward Star Trek into a new era with all kinds of new representation, which has been great. And I'm not one that I believe representation is important, but I don't believe it is what makes a show progressive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the show kind of does it in both ways. It really like lays out a lot of the like sort of progressive ideals of the Federation, while also including a lot of cool representation that allows us to see different kinds of people. And that's really what Star Trek is all about, I think. I mean, to seek out new life and new civilizations is a great line about space travel, but it's also about finding new types of life and accepting it as it is, accepting life,
I mean, I think one of the dangers of the checkbox idea of representation, which is not, I think, what people, who are quote unquote woke or whatever are actually talking about, but it's how a lot of Hollywood often responds to it, is you get into tokenism. And one of my favorite characters in this show is, the Klingons are a fantastic people. And we've gotten a lot over the decades and decades of Star Trek over how Klingons are a warrior race. We have a Klingon character who wants to be pretty nonviolent and wants to be a nurse, and is doing a lot to challenge. And not only is that challenging us in terms of that, but like his story within his own people is about how he doesn't want to live the life that his family wants him to live. And I think, to me, that was such a great way of like challenging the idea of like the more representation is good, but also telling stories about how no one person is going to represent a group, and there are differences within groups, and it's good to challenge those things.
Yeah. And very much of his story is about not being forced to live out the version of that your culture or your family or your religion or whatever has told you your life is supposed to be. You get to choose your own life and be who you are. And he has a brother who is not like him, who is a warrior, and his brother though like supports him being different. And it is a really powerful episode.
I mean, you mentioned Captain Acker, who is I wouldn't say is quite as much the star of the show as like William Shatner's Kirk was, but
Definitely
it
not.
is very much the Kirk, Picard, Cisco, Janeway. Like she is the captain, she's the chancellor of
Mhm.
the school, and so it is our second woman in that kind of a role after Janeway. Well, and also third if you count. No, it's actually like third or fourth when you think about
Yeah.
Discovery and other shows
Discovery.
like that. But
Gwendolyn too, yeah, from, have you
Lower
watched
Decks,
the Prodigy?
and I haven't. No, but yeah.
It's
So
great.
but it's also like if you compare her to Janeway or her to Burnham, a fundamentally different kind of character. Like she is very
Absolutely.
much it's Holly Hunter playing her, and it is not Holly Hunter trying to be a non-Holly Hunter role.
No,
And
she's
and it,
wonderful.
and it's again, and I think I like to go back to that point you brought up about scarcity. I think is so important because one of the plot lines that gets talked about, and I my understanding is that you and I both wish it had been talked about a little bit more in the finale, and we'll get to that.
Mm.
But one of the plot lines that they go into is the idea of as you are coming out of a scarcity model, but you're still viewing the world in scarcity, how do the people who do actually have a lot less than you look at you? And how what's the line between wanting to help people versus wanting to control them through your help or going to bring people into your group versus colonization and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And for me, watching this show about there are people suffering out there and we have enough to help them and we need to figure out how to help them at a time that a lot of the world, but especially our own country, is dramatically cutting our efforts to help the world and
Yeah.
is shifting to more to that war college mentality of we interact through the world through our military instead of through our aid groups. This feels like a very relevant show and one
100%, yeah.
without hitting you over the head with that.
No, and obviously this show was, filmed before, the USAID was really dismantled, likely.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly, but it definitely was written before.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that was an intentional thing, but man, it's all over it for sure.
Yeah.
And just, kind of disconnecting it from today, just the idea of like it's playing with classic Star Trek. It's a new sorry, I keep like starting sentences and not finishing them. Bad podcaster. It's a new setting for Star Trek. It's very different. It actually reminds me. It's a little bit repetitive of what they did with Picard, which was also a period of scarcity that led into Picard
Right.
being a little different. But it's trying to make Starfleet its best and it's trying to make the Federation its best and trying to open back up. And I think it's really important for today, but also just in general, those are the ideas of Star Trek. And in the old days, I feel like the original series felt very, you're out there by yourself. So you have to make these decisions that sometimes risk your crew while trying to hold up your ideals.
Right.
I think the newer age of Star Trek, the Next Generation, felt a little more like there's Starfleet everywhere, and we are very powerful, and that's the 90s,
Yeah.
and this just felt very much like just a completely different new kind of era for Star Trek, but still trying to live up to the ideals while facing the practical challenges of, what are you risking when you live up to those ideals? What are you, how much of yourself are you willing to give to make sure others are okay,
Yeah. Like one thing my mom loved to point out is that in the 60s, Star Trek was about the Cold War, and that the Klingons and the Romulans were kind of the Russians and the Chinese.
Mhm.
And then Next Generation is written mostly in a time when, the Berlin Wall has fallen and we're at peace with the Russians. Also we're at peace with the Klingons, but also the Romulans are still a threat, and so I think so much of that is so true. And looking again at a larger question that isn't just today, but is kind of throughout the history of Starfleet and the history of Star Trek, one topic that I hear come up a lot, and sometimes I think this is in that kind of Twitter, TikTok, I'm not engaging in good faith, I'm just throwing a line that sounds good without getting to the nuance, but sometimes in very nuanced ways, our conversation that I hear a lot, and I think we did a podcast about this, is Starfleet a military? And should we see it as a military? And I think that Star Trek has engaged with that question to some extent. This season, the whole question of should we have a war college or should we have something else that is not focused? It feels like this is a way of really engaging with that question in a really deep way. Talk more about like that tension between should we be training young people for the military and for war, and Starfleet being something distinct from that.
It's interesting. I don't remember if there was a war college in the old days of Star Trek. There may have been some sort of war college because obviously they do combat in Star Trek. And I do remember, I think on Enterprise, there was a group of like Space Marine type people who came on the ship for like the final season when they were at war with the Xindi. So it's not unprecedented. But in modern, I say modern, it's so hard to talk about because now all the time periods, there's time periods within the show and time periods outside the show. But like the 90s Trek of TNG, DS9, and Voyager, they felt very much like Starfleet was a peaceful organization that had to resort to violence when it had to, you know.
Right.
And this, they're coming out of a time where they are not the big dog on the street. Like they've lost so many planets, and now they have this war college. And I don't recall if that was a thing in the olden days in the 90s or whatnot, but it is. I don't think they really asked that question with this season, though. It is a question we can talk about and we can ask, but I think that they take the war college as it's not like Ake is going in going, you war college people need to stop being a war college. She's just like, that's just not what we're doing.
Right.
You guys are necessary for what you're necessary for. We're necessary for something else. And I think it's interesting because I do think that like the Federation is still in a place where it needs that military. And I always find that interesting. It's one of some of the most interesting episodes of Star Trek. I always talk about how I love the progressive nature of Star Trek, but some of the most interesting episodes are the episodes where people do terrible things that are not progressive at all. Probably my favorite episode of Star Trek is In the Pale Moonlight. It's from DS9 where an officer does a war crime, you know, like, and chooses to do a war crime and tells you about it as the listener or as the watcher, and then deletes the log at the end. And it's so dark, and it's so like, that is your hero doing dark things, but he truly believes they have to be done at this dark time. And I think that it's interesting because after the burn, which was the calamity on Starfleet Academy, and this scarcity time, they don't think they have an option. They don't have an option not to have a war college. And I don't think anyone's questioning them. I do think that might be a thing that happens in the subsequent seasons as they become more secure. But right now, their security is at stake. Like they believe that, I mean, in this season, a group of kind of terrorists, I guess, for lack of a better term, take over or try to fence the entire Federation in and almost succeed at that.
I totally agree with that. And I'll get to what I meant about the difference there, but just talking about some of the specific things you mentioned, I do agree. And I think it's always been one of the tensions at the heart of Star Trek is that it is, and part of this is within the story itself, and part of it is storytelling. You know, Star Trek, like you always like to joke that, like, you know, Star Wars is space battles and laser swords. Star Trek is, you know, gathering around tables to better understand each other, to talk to each other.
My line is, I don't need my heroes and villains color coded. That's my line about Star Wars.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But what is the thing that within the world of Star Trek that Picard is most famous for? It's a combat maneuver where he figures out something about warp speed and how where positions are. What is the single most popular Star Trek movie? It's Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is 100% a submarine movie in space. I mean, it is a war movie. And,
absolutely.
And part of that we can get into, that's the, like, you know, movies with spaceship battles make a lot more money than people sitting around tables. That's my complaint about Marvel Civil War. I want Tony and Cap to just keep debating what's the best way to handle these questions instead of punching it out.
I think what you're getting at is an interesting tension that I haven't really wrestled with on a podcast. So let's wrestle. And it's the idea that, like, I think all geekdom has this at its core.
100%.
Almost every geek property that I can think of is inherently very progressive at the core of its, like, I'm sure some people will point out some that are not, but at the core of its, like, philosophy.
Yeah.
But
the social commentary and critique and the questions it's asking.
Yes. And therefore the diehards like me and you about these shows are, and a lot of the podcasters we work with, they follow those philosophy things, you know, but most people go to those movies for lasers and swords or whatever, you
Yeah,
know, like
space battles and all that. Yeah,
yeah, space battles. And like, so the things that are most popular are the things that do those things well. But the people that are most driven and the deepest fans, and it's almost like this, uh I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic between like what makes something popular versus what makes someone truly love a thing. Like
yeah,
what makes a geek fall in love and go deeper and deeper. And I think it is that philosophy. You want the thing that your fandom should be a thing that you can dive into and really truly learn about yourself and your life and your
right.
own philosophy and like question things. I believe that about fandoms. But like a lot of people are, when you want people to go to a movie like Deadpool and Wolverine, you want a lot of people that don't care about what Deadpool and Wolverine have to say. You just want, they're there for the fights and the laughs. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that's a very interesting tension.
Yeah. There is it in fandom. Like, I think we can, in the same way that like we can Google and I'm sure find a podcast that goes into every different kind of Federation starship and every different kind of Romulan
Mhm.
starship and who would beat each other in a fight. And
Yeah, for
you and
sure.
I love to talk about the ethical questions of Cap versus Tony and all of that. And there are also people, and I think we're some of both, who are also really curious about, like, would Superman win in a fight against, this Marvel, against Captain Marvel or something like that, and there's room for all of it. But yeah, I think that's always a tension of the entertainment media industry. And that's something we're going to get into in a bit, but we're going to talk about just in terms of like what the political message is, but just this question of, how many fight scenes are there versus how much time is sitting and talking, because the sitting and talking or walking and talking or taking off your clothes while you're talking, as HBO decided was the way to do it, that catches a lot of people's interests. But the fight scenes are really big too. Game of
Mhm.
Thrones has a lot of great stuff, but that show does not become as popular without some of the best, medieval combat scenes that we've ever seen. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, there's always this tension. Let's get into, though, I think, two. There's so many ethical questions this show raises. A lot of it episode by episode, some of it overarching. But let's kind of talk about the ones that kind of frame the story at the beginning and the end. And the beginning, we kind of our two main characters, really, if we have them, are Acker and then this other guy,
It's
who
Ake, by the way.
Ake, thank you.
No
It's
R.
funny because Dave's always correcting you, so I want you to correct me, and it can be passed down. And Mir, what's his first name?
Caleb.
Caleb Mir. And our opening scene is set in the past for the show, still thousands of years in the future for us, but where Ake is kind of the equivalent of a judge, playing some kind of like judicial
Mhm.
role. Ake has been involved in something criminal. Someone has died. She didn't necessarily do the shooting, but
You mean, sorry, Caleb's mom
Caleb's mom,
has
uh,
been involved in a criminal activity.
right? What was her name? A
Anisha
with
Mir.
A. Alicia. Thank you.
Anisha with an
Anisha.
I-N.
Thank you. Um, uh, and Anisha has a small child, and the decision is made to put her into, we're past the Carroll systems of today, but we still have some kind of what is a prison system. It's a much nicer and much more rehab focused one, but it is still a prison of a kind, and where her ability to interact with her son is going to be limited.
Well,
And oh, go ahead.
and there are two people involved. It's her and this the guy who actually did do the shooting,
Mhm.
who I'm Noose Braca, and he's sent to like a penal colony. Like he is straight up sent to prison. So
Right.
the prison does exist in this time period of the Federation, just regular prison. She is going to be sent to a rehabilitation colony though.
Right, right. Where she's going to have limited contact with her son, but she's still very angry about it. A lot of things happen, and basically, Ake like acknowledges that she feels terrible about the situation and that wishes there was some other solution. There's a lot more nuance to it, but she winds up resigning. And then picks back up with her kind of trying to find the son later and so he becomes one of our main characters because she kind of brings him into this academy when it starts. What did you think of that storyline and kind of how it was told and what it was saying?
I loved it so much. I'm gonna cry talking about it because I just truly, truly loved it. And like the Ake as a character was so meaningful and loving and caring and wanted to help Caleb so much. And the first scene where she finds him
Yeah.
after 20 years or whatever it's been. I'm not sure how many years it's been, 15. Um, so he was like 6 when he escaped, like as a little kid who had some tech skill. He escapes the prison or the little waiting room and into the wilderness of a distant
Mhm.
planet, and then somehow makes it his whole life surviving on, as they call him, a space rat.
Yeah.
And he's just been a little criminal his whole life, and then she finally finds him, and he is so much bigger than her, and there's just this amazing scene where she is trying to show him this very like maternal affection. She lost her son. She
Right.
feels very maternal towards him, and very much like she wants to help this kid who has lost his mother because of her, and lost his whole life because of her. And it's just this amazing scene where he is towering over her and trying to menace her, but
Yeah.
she won't stop trying to embrace him, metaphorically, not
Yeah.
physically, but she won't stop trying to tell him, like, no, I want you to. And it is just so powerful, and it is an example of exactly what I'm talking about with the bigger themes of the season, which is Starfleet is small and not powerful enough, but Ake is the kind of person who believes in embracing people and helping people regardless of your
Yeah.
ability to beat them in a fight. And that's what she does with Caleb, and it is just such a powerful scene. But that scene got me big time, and just Holly Hunter's amazing in the show.
Mhm.
Uh, Tatiana Maslany as Anisha Mir is I love Tatiana Maslany so much, and she is just killing it. Like it was really true. And then of course Noose Braca, played by Paul Giamatti. Like
Mhm.
those three together in a Star Trek show, I was sold. I was nervous about Academy when I heard
Yeah.
about it. I was sold on the show when I heard those three were involved, and then those three getting this very entwined plot line where it,
Mhm.
it lives in the first episode all the way through to the last. It's a gift. I can't even say more than just I think it's just an amazing gift that we got to show the way we
The
did.
acting is so good, especially because in some ways they're acting in different tones, because Holly Hunter and Tatiana Maslany are both like, one of the things that the system that the it would be easy for this to be kind of a remake of The Blind Side, which, is a fun movie, but is about a privileged white woman who adopts a poor black kid and kind of rescues him and teaches him football and helps him to go on be an NFL star. And it's based on a true story. And the actual guy, Michael Orr, who's the heart of it, has sued because he's like, this is very much a white savior story. And yes, I love my family, but this is not a good story, a good version of the story. And it would be easy for this to become that, but it's not, because part of what the story starts with is that, yes, Ake is probably making the best of a number of bad possible choices, but they're all bad choices. And part of that is because Tatiana, the other two characters have made some bad choices themselves, but also it's because it's still a clerical prison system, and that's not good, and there are problems with it. Um, and also the dynamic between Ake and Mir, the way that it plays out, like, everything you just said is true. She loves him. She wants to take care of him, but she's also projecting her feelings about her dead son on him. And
100%. Yeah.
she is, and like all of the kind of privilege issues that something like The Blind Side doesn't talk about, this wrestles with. And he pushes back in some ways on, like, that he's not her son, and that he's not her
Hmm.
second chance, and that he has to get to do his own thing, including wanting to go for his actual mother, who's not her. And the way the story was willing to deal with all of that complexity and sort of like name it as like, this is a bad situation and no one is totally right, and one person's mostly wrong, and that's kind of what I meant about the tone, because like Holly Hunter and Tatiana Maslany are caught in this awful courtroom drama in that first episode, and Paul Giamatti is just chewing every piece of scenery he can find,
Hmm.
having the
Hmm.
time of his life as a like, he literally has a mustache to twirl, as you guys pointed out in your most
Yeah.
recent podcast.
Yep.
But they make it fit together, and just the way the story is told, it is so heartbreaking, and it makes you care about the characters in a way that is so like about this, and it's not hitting you over the head, but also like you can't help but think about, uh, you know, my sister is interested in looking into my sister's looking into foster care, and a lot of kids in foster care, it's because their parents have gotten into the prison industrial complex. And I think, and so she has a lot of feelings about like wanting to help take care of these kids, but also not wanting to be part of a system that's taking kids away from their parents when that isn't have to be the option. And I couldn't help but think about all that as I'm watching this.
Yeah. Dang. Yeah, it's a really well told story, and I feel like you were talking about, with the exception of Noose Braca, who is very mustache twirly, both physically and metaphorically. He's such a the story is told in a way that you really understand the perspective of all the characters, and it really means a ton for all of them, and it's great. It's just such a great, like it is a great heart for the first season, and I'm wondering what they'll do with the second season, because this season felt almost like a fairy tale. Does that make sense? Where or like a mythic quest, like, child ripped from the arms of his mother, wanting to get back, and then this judge who felt terrible about this choice, and it's very tied into their histories and the past, and it feels like second season is going to struggle to have that tight of a story, because I just think this one's just so well told and so cohesive throughout, but also is very episodic, and each episode has its own little story. Really well done Star Trek. That is something I always talk about when I'm talking about any of these shows, is how well it balances the episodic versus the serialized. And this show did it in a just a great way. Really great.
And while that's the main story, it's kind of like if you think about like Buffy or other shows like that, where there's like a villain of the week, but also the overarching story. It's not necessarily a villain of the week, but there's a plot of the week, and a lot of the other characters get developed. There's an incredible story about photonic life and families that particularly if you're a fan of Voyager, there was one, like, there's so many callbacks. If you're a big Star Trek fan, in Voyager, the Doctor goes through some harrowing experiences that then kind of get forgotten about. And there's a beautiful callback to that in this. A number of things like that. And, some of them are better than others. As I think you pointed out, there's one storyline that is really, really powerful girl is also kind of vulnerable and has to be controlled in order to not hurt others. That's, kind of the parts of the Dark Phoenix story that I've heard a bunch of times, and I'm not a huge fan of.
Grey. She's Jean Grey for sure.
But so much of it is so well told. And I'm torn because I kind of want to dive into the ethical questions at the end of the episode, not get into too many spoilers because it is so good. But let me kind of raise it, because I think you and I had a similar perspectives, and I want to hear more from you about this. This question of who do we blame becomes a really important one. And even Paul Giamatti's character, and yes, I'm saying that because I can't remember his name.
Noose Braca.
Thank you, Braca. He has a real chip on his shoulder against the Federation. And there's this whole thing at the end that's kind of that he kind of wants to put the Federation on trial. And in some ways, it's a great callback to Q putting the Federation and the Earth on trial at the beginning of TNG that I loved. And I think, like you, the solution winds up being that the Federation is fine and that he's misguided. Talk a bit more about that, because I heard you talk in your own podcast about how I kind of had to feel like I wanted the Federation to be a little more on trial.
I agree with you. I think it's hard for me to talk about this without talking about another recent episode of Star Trek from Strange New Worlds, where they do this documentary about the Federation, and the entire the episode is shot as a documentary, and they have a documentary filmmaker who we've seen on the ship throughout the season, and he is making a movie about the Federation, and he makes a movie about it being a military, something you brought up earlier, and how this isn't a peaceful organization, and he brings up the weapons, and he shows all the stuff, and shows all these questionable decisions that the captains made, and prioritizing military actions over humanitarian efforts and things like that. And so it's this really intense documentary, and then the third act is him realizing it's his sister. It works on the ship. She's one of the officers, and he realizes in the third act that his real problem with the Federation is they took his sister away, and he feels, hurt that his sister left him for the Federation.
Yeah,
and it is one of the most disappointing episodes of Star Trek I've ever seen, because it starts out so strong in its questioning of the Federation ideals and like the kind of questions we ask all the time. We had that episode, like you mentioned, about military. It wasn't a military, and it is so frustrating.
Yeah.
And so I believed in this show because of that first episode, because of the first episode where they really have Holly Hunter making a decision that rips a family apart. You know, we family separation is a common discussion in this country right now because of the things that have happened politically in our country. And like it was a really heartrending thing, and it's showing that this beloved, wonderful main character resigns from the Federation because of it. So I really thought when they got to the trial, it was going to be fully in on the questions, you know, go for it, just really go for it. And they did a much better job, in my opinion, than that episode. But they still hinged the ending of the episode on the fact that Noose Braca, after much discussion, they realized Noose Braca, his main origin story about hating the Federation was flawed.
Yeah.
And it just kind of undercuts it in a way that, like, I wish they had the conversation, and he decides to put the Federation on trial, and as a avatar for the Federation, he uses Ake, and as an avatar of those hurt by the Federation, he uses Anisha, and he has Anisha and Ake have a conversation in front of everyone about what she'd done to her.
Right.
And it is spectacular. It is wonderful. I love it so much. And Ake doesn't they don't hold back about the Federation and what they've done, but they also don't hold back about the fact that Anisha was partially responsible for the death of this crewman, you know, and it is revealed in that conversation that Ake actually knew the crewman and was like friends with him, and that's a whole different emotion. So that they do a lot of really cool things where like it is morally gray and complicated and interesting, and you see the Federation's dark side as well as their light side. But the Noose Braca of it all just turns out that he's mad because they didn't help his family more when they didn't when they had scarce resources. His family wasn't the most in trouble, so they triaged and chose other planets to help instead of his mining colony. And then in response, his father, angry at the Federation, just tried to strike at the Federation. And in his memory, because his father tried to strike at the Federation destroyed his colony. In actuality, through conversation, they realized, because he says they lit up the fire with fire red or whatever. They lit up our colony with in red fire. And then she basically ends up bringing up that the thing that they mined was actually burned red, and Federation weapons burn blue and green. And so it's not.
So Star Trek is a little color coded.
Yeah, it is a little bit color coded. For sure. It basically allows you to disregard Noose Braca's problems out of like he's just wrong. And again, it's a personal problem that he has misremembered and held on to since childhood. And it reminds me a lot of that problem with the documentary episode. But the Anisha and Ake stuff is really strong, and I think does a much better job. And also it's this whole story is kind of capped off by Caleb showing up and saying what he thinks of everything.
Right.
And I found that a little bit weak. It wasn't perfect, but it was still very like, it was nice because you've got these two women arguing about him and the effects that they've had on his life.
Right. And both in some ways speaking for him.
Exactly.
And him speaking. And I had a lot of similar frustrations. I wanted it to be, because I think there's something worth saying about your desire to help and your desire to do a good thing doesn't mean that all your results are good, and doesn't mean you're excused from the harm you cause by trying to help. And I think they do wrestle with that to some extent with the Ake, with the story specifically about Caleb. And I wanted more of that in terms of the Federation itself, and some acknowledgement of, maybe that there is some legitimacy to his grievances.
Yeah.
When I watched it again, though, and also listening to you guys somewhat, I had a somewhat different take on it, which is that I think he is meant, and again, maybe it's in part because it's a little bit too on the nose of a political commentary, and
Yeah.
we wanted something broader. There are an awful lot of people who are today very mad about things that are simply factually wrong.
100%.
And where other people are lying to them and are telling them your scarcity, your suffering is due to this thing, and that is simply factually incorrect.
100%.
And so
Yeah.
I think there's a way in which you can I think when I see him as that metaphor, and that but I wish there'd been, because I think, and again, I think this is a problem of people on the left a lot, like, you know, not to get too directly political, but like I think we can recognize that there are people who are blaming their scarcity on the wrong things, and be dismissive of that without acknowledging that there still is scarcity that's causing the anger in the first place, and we should have some
Absolutely.
sympathy and empathy for that. And that's where I wish there'd been a little, and I think there was some of it, there was some, but like part of what she says is, look, you had a mining colony, so you were better than others at least.
Yeah.
And
You had something. There were a lot
yeah,
of colonies that had nothing, and we were helping those people. There's a line that breaks my heart. She said, "Some colonies, all they needed was body bags," and it's like, "Whoa, fuck,
yeah, that
hard
hit so
time."
hard.
Mm,
That like and yeah, and I wish it had been more of a like, there is a level of like, I wish we could have helped you. But I wish they'd been more engaging with that, like, what did the Federation do wrong here? But I think that's also how, it's really complicated. It's really
yeah,
nuanced. And people with legitimate grievances sometimes do really terrible things with those grievances, or blame them on the wrong people.
yeah.
And that all of that's in this story.
I completely agree with you, and I definitely saw that parallel.
Mhm.
Um, and the thing that I did love, and I mentioned this on our cast, the thing that I did love about the turn of them realizing that Newsbrock was wrong, that his dad's own weapon ignited the atmosphere, not the Federation attacking, is it was this really beautiful thing where Aka used sort of this platonic device where she's asking questions of the people around
Mhm.
her to get them to answer, and they answer, and she uses science. And like that is a thing that like is all about Star Trek. Like that is Star Trek, like finding truth and evidence and using science to actually base your things on fact. And so while I do think there's a little bit that undercuts the argument and doesn't let you fully explore the problems of the Federation, the actual resolution of that storyline where Newsbrock is wrong, and I'm going to tell you using science, which is incredibly important to the
Yeah.
Federation, and that is beautiful. I love it when they realize that she asked, I think Caleb, who's her student,
Mhm.
who have you had, she says, have you had this class yet? And he's like, yeah. And like, what color does strontium burn? And he says, red. Actually, I think Anisha pauses and gets kind of
Yeah.
stone faced and goes, red. And like that's when they realize, and it's her using facts and science to actually like prove this guy wrong, and he doesn't buy it. He just starts going lies, lies, and propaganda, and he's just going over the top with his mustache twirling
Yeah.
villainy. But and he's not going to believe them in that moment,
Yeah.
but it proves it to the gallery, the people who are judging them. Yeah.
And to me, that moment is so beautiful, and is also so much like a fairy tale, because so often
Mhm.
the people in the gallery don't listen. But the hope that this has of that science, particularly, I think, because sometimes I think a criticism of some earlier Star Trek, as well as sometimes the people who are like, science will fix everything, is that like the science tells you what actually happened in that atmosphere. But some level of empathy is involved. If you just use science and math to decide which planets get help and which don't, congratulations, you're gonna have a lot of really pissed off planets, and maybe legitimately and maybe not. Some empathy and emotion becomes necessary to do that part of it. And so it's not perfect. There's a lot of things I questioned, but I do really like how the show wrestled with that, and the idea that science is so needed and so important, and empathy too. But that if you're starting with incorrect facts, incorrect science, you're just never going to get to the right place.
Yeah, I agree completely. And maybe this when you say you want to put the Federation on trial, like I want to see the Federation on trial, and so the thing that I do have the issue with, the very small issue, because like I said, it's way better treated than in that documentary episode from Strange New Worlds,
Mhm.
but it is the fact that like I think the entirety of what they really question about the Federation in reality in this episode, in the final episode, is that Anisha got her son taken away. Like that's pretty much the only thing that stands. All the other stuff is kind of explained away or very conveniently like answered by Aki. Not necessarily conveniently, but honestly, she says, like you said, there were other planets that had nothing, and she says leadership is not for the faint of heart, and she kind of says that directly to News Braca. Like sometimes when you are in that situation, you have to make the hard calls, and you're not ready for that because he's trying to take over and be in charge in that quadrant. Oh, I do love it. I do love it. Even with that little slight quibble, I think you're totally right about who he represents and what the way she answers him with science. It blows me away. I love it so much.
And I think like an overall critique I would have is that it paints with a broad brush when it's trying to make a big point. Like there's a fantastic episode about. Let me start again. There's an episode that I think has some down points and some up points, but makes a fantastic point about how theater and the arts can be an essential part of therapy and can be an essential part of healing after trauma.
Yeah.
There are some parts of it, though, where I kind of wish it had been in conjunction with actual therapy, and it kind of railroads the idea of totally. But anyway, there's so much more I want to get into, and I'm sure we'll have you on for more discussions about this. But the other side of this is at least we can be safe because the people who are giving the money to the show and are getting money from the show, they're just letting the artists and the writers and the actors do whatever they want. And there's no agenda there whatsoever. So we don't have to worry about that, right?
Yep. No agenda. No billionaires involved in this one.
We recently learned that Starfleet Academy is not going to have a second season. Is going to have a second season, but no more beyond that. Talk about what's going on here. And I think we're going to do a full episode on the role of money in these things that get to decide what messages come out and don't. But we're getting to a worse place than we've been in before. So talk about what's happening.
100%. Our landscape of art and media in general is becoming owned by billionaires in a way that is really scary, really scary. I mean, right now it is like Warner Brothers, Paramount, which includes CNN. Warner Brothers includes CNN. One of them includes CNN.
Yeah.
And then you've got TikTok. I think all three of those have been bought by the same family of billionaires who is buddy with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I will get directly political and just say this is a scary thing. This is Donald Trump is News Braca. He has no connection with reality. His hatred of various groups and his inspiration of hatred of various groups is based in falsehood. Everything he says is falsehood. It's not. This is not a new take. And if you're out there and you're a new Trump supporter, I'm sorry you've been duped the way you have. But like,
I think I have less Trump supporters listening to my podcast. That's quite a high number.
Well, you never know. But you've been duped. This guy's a liar. He lies about everything. He is just constantly telling you a thing that will get you to follow him and believe him. And this idea that all politicians lie or whatever, sure, they lie in degrees, but he's a different animal. He's lying about everything, and he's building a complete false reality. Not him by himself, the entire conservative media sphere, which is the problem. That is what we're talking about here. All these things have been bought up at the same time by this first year of Trump's presidency, and he is putting his thumb on the scale, and that is authoritarianism, just 100%. Netflix was going to buy Warner Brothers. They had already made a deal, and the Netflix CEO went to Trump's office to talk to the White House about whether they were going to approve his merger, and then that afternoon they dropped out, as so that the Ellisons could buy it.
And to be very clear about the Ellisons, because there are people who own television studios and media companies, and they allow things that don't fit their views because they just care about making money. These are the exact same people, because it's Paramount, it's CBS, who took Stephen Colbert off the air. Which is why I love that Colbert is a little bit on this show. That's another thing.
It's great.
The people who tried to take Jimmy Fallon off, not Jimmy Fallon. It was Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Kimmel, thank you, off the air. They have a proven record of interfering with the media. And granted, those are more news type things, entertainment, but more real world. But this show was actively targeted. Like Elon Musk was tweeting about how bad and how woke this show was
before the show came out.
Before the show came out, yeah.
Just based on images we'd seen of the show and things like that, and they were mad there was a fat person on the show, which she isn't that fat. And just mad that there was someone that was slightly overweight on the show. They were mad about obviously a gay or bisexual Klingon, a Klingon deciding not to be a warrior, like all of that stuff. They jumped on all of that before the show came out, or even after the first episode, and did not watch the show. And it pisses me off because I've had one Star Trek fan write in that said they didn't like the show on our show, and they were writing in response to the fact that I said every other fan I've talked to loved this show, but every right-wing douchebag who's just trying to make a point on the internet talked about how much they hated the show. And a lot of them have never talked about Star Trek before or since. Fucking Stephen Miller, Trump's Goebbels or whatever, was like up there saying that like how he wanted the show to be taken away, the Ellisons needed to take it away and give the creative control to William Shatner, which is like, what? By the way, William Shatner came out with
he's
a really great statement.
I mean, he's super terrible in a lot of ways, but also he was very pro all the things. And
yeah.
And I will say, like, I don't like the show as much as you do. Like, I think the show did a good job saying some really important things, and I'm really glad I watched it. And I think listening to your podcast actually helped me like it a lot more and helped me realize that some of the episodes I wasn't paying close attention to, and if I had. But when I think about the shows that if I'm like, I need a Star Trek fix, this is probably not the show I'm going to turn on. I don't think it was my favorite show. And I think there are some reasons to talk about some aesthetic concerns about the show or dislikes about the show, but the right-wing hatred of it is so much in bad faith. And like you said, like, and to be clear, like there should be like people of literally all body sizes in Star Trek, and there are. The character they talked about, though, like the only reason we're specifying it is to point out like they're factually incorrect at times, like and even like if you think this show is political, Discovery had Stacey Abrams play the president of the galaxy of the Federation,
which they mentioned Madam President in this season. I wanted her to show up. We joked on our podcast that like every time the president's shown, it should just be a different leader of the Democrats, like make it clear that Star Trek knows.
Gretchen Wilson to play,
the
pastor in Texas, Tarico, and
Tallarico show. That's who we joke like. Yeah, next time it's the president, Tallarico shows up or whatever.
Yeah, and this is the thing, whoever we want.
Obama was a Star Trek fan. Like these people, Stacey Abrams came on because she's a big Star Trek fan, and
and people will say, "Oh, but it's woke now." Literally. TV stations canceled Star Trek in the 60s because they had an interracial kiss. And it wasn't a surprise. Like, they kind of were courting that and like wanting people to realize like, we are going to be pushing the boundaries because that's what Star Trek has always done. And that's what science fiction has always done.
That's right.
So talk about like, we're talking about why we're reasonably afraid, but obviously now something has actually happened. It's going to have a second season. They've said that it won't have anything beyond that. And I think they're pretty clear indications that this is not just because it's got bad ratings or something like that.
Yeah, this is the thing that the reason it's not a business decision is because they announced it's not going to have a third season before the second season comes out because they want to kill it. I fully believe they want to kill it. If they had wanted to even just make money off of it, like, and let it run its course, they would have let the second season run, which has already been announced that it also ends on a cliffhanger. They already announced that like one of the writers said that season 2 ends on a really nice cliffhanger. And now they're announcing ahead of season 2 coming out that season 3 is not going to exist. And that is some bullshit. That is them deciding we want fans to not be invested in season 2 because we don't want, like, this is the first season of a new Star Trek show that has no connection. It has some slight connection to previous Star Trek. Actually, I take it back. It has tons of connection to previous Star Trek.
Yeah.
It's got the Doctor from Voyager. It's got Jet Reno from Discovery. But it's a new era of Star Trek with a lot of new cast members and a lot of new stories that are kind of disconnected from previous stories. It's a completely different time period, all of those things. but so it's going to take it a season or two to get its footing. And
Yeah.
for them to cancel it and announce its cancellation before they even see what the season 2, like a lot of people might catch this over the next couple months as people are talking about it. This is when the show could get popular, is when people like me and you are on here talking about what we like about it. Your listeners might go, oh,
Yeah.
well, I heard it was bad. I was at my in-laws' house and they were like, oh yeah, I've heard that show's really bad. They've never watched an episode of Star Trek in their life. They just heard
Yep.
from the right-wing sphere that it's a bad show, and like they didn't even internalize it as like right-wing propaganda. They just heard it was bad, and it's like the people who like it have to get the word out, and then people, and they've already filmed a season 2, they've already freaking made the show, so they are just shooting themselves in the foot financially to kill the show.
Yeah.
And that is directed, that is targeting.
And there's kind of two connections here. First of all, it's like, Star Wars fans are like, well, welcome to the party, because the exact same people use the exact same tactics about Acolyte, because, oh my God, it's lesbian space witches and all this kind of stuff. And Acolyte's a fantastic show. It has a lot of problems, but it has some really great parts, and it had a great story, and it ended on cliffhangers, and it has a lot more it could say. The other thing of it though is that, wait, something I was going to say. The other thing, though, is that, and I'm thinking about this because literally an hour ago, I recorded a podcast about baseball. And I'm not sure if this one's going to come out first or second. I'll decide which order they come out, but they're going to come out back to back. And in that one, we talked about how the owner of the Oakland Athletics intentionally tanked the team and let the stadium fall apart and didn't get good baseball players, so that it was a miserable experience. So people stopped going. And so he could then say to Major League Baseball, I can't support a team in Oakland. Let me move to Las Vegas. And it's the exact same thing that's happening here. And I think people should absolutely watch this show. I absolutely hope they don't change the cliffhanger, leave it on a cliffhanger so that we're demanding more. With some shows, they're able to kind of, pack up their stakes and say, well, if you won't, Orville was able to move to a different network. Star Trek is such a bigger property that's been associated with Paramount for literally, 80 years or 70 years, that I think it's going to be a lot harder for that to happen. But I do think that if people put a lot of pressure on them to like, look, people watch this, people want it. Either it's going to put pressure to like, hey, just prove that the whole idea of go woke, go broke isn't true. Cause again, facts matter, but also like if people are making stupid business decisions because they're politics, guess what? They're a publicly owned company. Like shareholders care about that. So there definitely is, watch the show because it's a good show. Watch the show because it'll ask hard questions, but also watch the show because it's a small way of sticking it to the right and their attempts to control the media that you get to watch. Like, let's make it clear that this is not okay because we're going to get a lot more right-wing media if it goes this way it's going.
And there have been various moments of Star Trek and various moments that were we talked about it earlier, how a lot of the best movies or the at least most beloved are like basically just war movies, and it's not like you can't have a progressive war movie. The idea is you have these moments where Khan and Kirk are going against each other, and it's about it's a lot of what we talked about earlier. It's Kirk wrestling with the fact that he made mistakes and his past coming back to haunt him, and all those things that are actual like real questions a person would ask, but also like their questions about who you bring into your tent, who do you take care of, who do you abandon, and making it's hard to even say it's progressive because it's not exactly. It's just that it's about ethical questions, which is what this show is all about. And like I think just asking those ethical questions and showing the different sides of the ethical question, looking at it from all the different angles, is a lot of what's important and gets people engaged, and I think moves people towards progressivism. So there's a possibility that like we will get an era of Star Trek that isn't. It's not like, I don't think they're going to make right-wing Star Trek. It would be just destroyed. Like no fans would want to watch it. But like I won't say no. There are very right-wing Star Trek fans, but they will probably enter an era of politic neutral Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, the J.J. Abrams films, I think, were fairly probably, fairly politically neutral, a lot more about
100%. Yeah.
characters and pretty women in their underwear and space battles and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And
He was more of a Star Wars fan.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, he did those movies as an audition to be able to make Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
I mean, not
100%.
Phantom Menace.
What?
Force Awakens.
I wanted to get there before you,
Yeah,
just to like really, really get in
Star
your
Wars
craw.
fans. And I think, yeah, I think that like I read a lot of books about Black politics and Black history of resistance and rebellion and reactions to racism within the Black community. And there are books that I wish a lot of my friends would read that they're never going to read. But they're going to watch Luke Cage and they're going to watch Black Panther. And those movies did a hell of a lot to educate people about questions that white people probably hadn't really thought about, internal issues and how like different ways of reacting to racism and things like that. And they also had incredible fight scenes and incredible, effects. And that's entertaining. And I got no problem with that. And the starship battles in New Trek are better. Like, I have no argument saying that, like, TNG, they didn't have anywhere near as many space battles, in part because they did want to focus on the philosophy, in part because they didn't have the budget or the tech. And
they definitely look better. There's something I don't know why I keep wanting to bring it up, and I wanted to bring it up when we talked about Caleb showing up at the thing. Something I've been thinking a lot about, and I've brought it up on multiple podcasts, so please excuse me if you're a Stranded Panda fan and you've heard me say this a bunch of times. Something that's really important to me about like a battle is I wish I was there's got to be a term for it. It's in a book, and I can't remember which script writing book it's in, but they talk about resolving all 3 levels of stakes at one time. You know what I'm talking about? Yep. Where it's the physical stakes, there's the external, the internal, which is more like the emotional stakes, and then there's the philosophical stakes, and rounding all of those out at the same time. And when Caleb walks into that room, it's the emotional stakes of him finding his mother, it's the internal stakes or the external stakes of him keeping Noose Braca occupied, and it's the philosophical stakes of him showing up to speak for himself. And it's just like those are the moments that like are truly meaningful in cinema. And I think Star Wars, the example that people always give, and it's the example that like feels most prescient, is Star Wars when he fires the shot. He decides to let go. That's his internal stakes. It's destroying the Death Star. That's the external stakes. And the philosophy of the Force and all of that, like, and giving over your power to the Force and trusting other, like all of that is all wrapped up in one press of a button. And that's why that explosion feels so good. And so like those space battles are great. And I think that what's weird is oftentimes when you go back in old Trek, and even though the space battles are whatever, less technologically interesting, less zip, sometimes they're more powerful because they get those stakes right. The 3 stakes align, and you hit that button, whatever that button is. You hit that button, you pull that lever, you jump off the thing, whatever your version of that is, and all the stakes align in a way that make you go, oh, catharsis. Like, I feel completely fulfilled by this story.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great analysis, and I'm going to use that going forward, because like a lot of times, especially in movies, I feel like and comic book superhero movies, there's a lot of this, and also sci-fi, there are battles that are like that. And then there are fights where it's like partway through our journey, our hero has to beat up some nameless minions of the bad guy just to remind you that they have cool superpowers and don't get too bored, and like those just don't land the same way.
They make me bored every time. Now there's a lot of shows that can still make those smaller battles. They don't have to have the eventual stakes of the entire thing, the entire story, of course, because that has to be resolved at the end. But like they have enough of the stakes in there that you feel them. I used to think of stakes when I think about stakes. I used to always just think about, oh, well, you have to feel at risk in this battle. You know what I mean? But that's not it. You have to feel that something is being resolved by this battle, whether it's internal, external, or philosophical. And when it's at its best, when it's at its real, true catharsis, is when it all hits at once. I love that.
I think kind of one of the most famous battle scenes now for comic book movie lovers is the hallway scene from the first season of Daredevil on Netflix.
1000%.
And put aside anything else, it is cinematography, in terms of cinematography, in terms of being one shot, and like how many actors have to perfectly coordinate when they're doing things and how much of that happens. It is a masterpiece of technical filmmaking, TV making. But also, it has the external stakes of, it's not rescuing a city, it's rescuing a single child, but like a literal child has been taken prisoner, kidnapped, and is in mortal danger. That's high stakes.
Mm-hmm.
It is the internal stakes of Matt battling against, because one of the things that makes it so powerful is the number of times where he slumps against a wall in pain and exhaustion, and then yet another bad guy comes out, and you just see that he is fighting the physical battle, but he's also fighting the mental battle, where so much of his just body and mind is saying enough already. And then also the philosophical of, can you be a hero without being having the superpowers, and his whole struggle of, can you do right in the world through violence? You know,
Yeah.
he's a lawyer.
That's the real philosophical stakes. That before he goes and does that, he goes and sits with his priest, and he says like, I need forgiveness for a thing I'm gonna do. You know, he's like, and the priest is like, that's not how it works. You know, you gotta give forgiveness after. And he's like, I'm gonna go do a thing that I don't think is right. But in that moment, when he picks up the child at the end of the hallway, he fights his way to the end of the hallway, and that's the physical, and like you said, the mental, the exhaustion, everything he's going through. He fights through all of that to get to the end of the hallway, and when he picks up that child and carries him out, that is the philosophical stakes being resolved. That like, I did a thing I wasn't sure was right because my religion tells me not to. But this was the right thing to do, and this kid is all that it matters in this moment, and everything else I fought that was telling me not to was wrong, and I am what is required in this moment, even if I don't love the idea of violence being the choice, like in my own mind, but like that is what the story is telling, and you're right, it's a great moment.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we've kind of gone off on a great tangent, but on a pretty far tangent from where we started about the problem with billionaires. So it may be time to wrap up the episode.
Billionaires. Hopefully it won't be so bad. Hopefully we'll get an era of Star Trek that still asks the questions. It may not. And in some ways, not answering the questions for you is not always a bad thing. I think there are times in Star Trek where they are a little too chicken shit to say the answer to the question, and in retrospect it looks bad, and we may feel that way, we're like, come on guys, just say like they're wrong.
Yeah.
It's okay to just like but I do generally like when our enemies aren't color coded, and we get even if they are wrong, they're explored fully and understood better.
And either way, the power of Star Trek is going to continue. I think there is absolutely true value of doing things under the name Star Trek and having Klingons and Romulans and the new races and all this stuff and this timeline. I also will stand by the idea, and you and I did a great podcast on it, that one of the best Star Trek shows ever made is Orville.
Yeah.
Because it is 100% a love letter to Star Trek. And because it is unconstrained by some of the things, it was very critical of the Prime Directive and some other stuff. It also had a lot of sophomore humor that some people love. It was not my favorite, but it took the Star Trek idea and clearly wrote we're going to be critical of you in a loving way, not in a like, oh, you're bad, but in a like, I am in love with you and I want to help you be better. And I absolutely think that the people who wrote this and who wrote some of the other newer shows are aware of Orville and have seen some of it, and if not all of it, and are aware of some of that, because I don't think the Prime Directive got mentioned once in this show, did it?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think if they may have not had I don't think they encountered a world that wasn't already warp capable, because they were in the center of the Federation or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the story is that no one was warp capable for a while, so in some ways, it's not relevant. But I do think that's a conscious choice by the writers of, we're going to create a situation where that's not the question we're asking anymore, because maybe that wasn't always the best question to ask.
Yeah. By the way, I do have to mention, do you, something you may not be aware of. Do you know they're making another season of the Orville?
No, really? Okay.
Yes. I didn't know. I was listening to him on an interview the other day, and it was mostly about Ted, and he did an offhanded comment about how they're working on, they're finishing up the production on season 4 of the Orville, and I was like, what? I thought for sure that show was gone. Like, it's been a few years, and I thought like it's gone. It is apparently coming out in late 26 or 27.
Oh, it's amazing.
That's so exciting, and it's a show he loves, and
Yeah.
that makes me excited to see more of it. Love that show.
Yeah, it's so good. Matt and I did a number of episodes of it together. I had a very strong emotional reaction in one episode. Matt switched to another host for a while, but I still had Matt back on. I'd love to get on your podcast, or podcast. We'll figure something out. But yeah, it's and clearly, like, that I think is the closest direct thing. But like, you look at a movie like oh God, what's the name of it? I can't remember now. The beautiful, beautiful send up of that's really a love letter to Star Trek fans.
Galaxy Quest?
Galaxy Quest. Like, that's clearly a Star Trek love letter. There's a lot of things like that out there. So
yeah, for sure.
The Ellisons will try, but the further and
listen, if the Ellisons take Star Trek from us and make it into some bastardized version, let's all just switch over and watch the Orville.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I think the 3rd season they got way more away from the sophomoric humor, and it still was humorous, of course, but like, it started to be much more just like directly, this is Star Trek.
Yeah, Seth has talked about this, that like, he never wanted it to be that, but people were like, you're Seth MacFarlane, people know you for that.
Yeah, you're the Family Guy. You got to do this.
Even halfway through the 1st season, it starts to really taper off a lot.
And there's great moments of sophomoric humor that are funny, but then like, they're always mixed. The 1st season is wonderful and full of complex, great ethical situations that like are everything I want from Star Trek.
The fact is a side point. We'll say this and let you say your word and then get out. But like, the amount of low hanging fruit they avoid. Like, for example, like, they talk about like, people need to step away from their consoles on the bridge to use the bathroom, and they have some fun with that in the Orville. But they do an episode about transgender rights and issues of transgenderism, and just how we think about gender in general. And a story that spans all 3. There is so much low hanging fruit for sophomoric humor that they never go near.
Yeah.
They just, so yeah, it's a fantastic show. I think it's one of the best Star Trek shows out there. We'll keep having you on that. So
thanks, man.
Matt,
speaking of, I know we got to wrap up, but they did for, I think the first time, I'm not sure, they mentioned going to the bathroom on Starfleet Academy.
Did they? Okay.
They did. There's a band called Ookla the Mock in like the 90s. They were like a Star Trek parody band type thing.
Yeah.
They have a whole song Where Are the Bathrooms on the Enterprise? Because you never see a bathroom. They talk about sonic showers, but they never talk about the bathroom because it's just kind of gauche, I guess.
Yeah.
But in this Genesis takes the con, and she sits down and says, I have to pee. It's yay! Somebody said they had to pee on Star Trek,
and it was a great moment. It's all about the build up to her doing this thing, and it's fantastic. And
anyway,
sorry, there's now one thing I was going to say about that. We're so bad. This is why
that's okay.
But
it's your thing to edit. It's fine with me. I don't care.
Matt normally is the one who has to edit. All right, so that's the transition we'll talk about. I heard you talk about that Genesis moment on your podcast. Tell us about your Star Trek podcast and your other podcasts and where people can find you.
Oh, I am one of the founding guys from Stranded Panda, the network, and my 2 kind of flagship shows that I work on are the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, where we talk Marvel stuff, and Multiverse News, where we talk kind of the news of we say it's where you get all your news from your favorite fictional universes. So it's just all the different multiversal. So we talk about DC, Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, and all the ones in between, The Boys, and we kind of go into weird, like just whatever's in pop culture too sometimes. So just entertainment news show. It's a lot of fun. Multiverse News. And so check those 2 out and anything else on the Stranded Panda network. If you like the Orville stuff, or you want to hear me and Matthew did the Orville on an Orville Universe podcast, but then we moved it all over to what is now called Always Watching, where me and Matthew did a bunch of the show over there. So you can check that out on Always Watching. And Matthew's been a guest on all of our things a bunch of times. So check us out.
It's a great network. I am the ethical panda because I started on Stranded Panda Island. I swam away at one point, but I still stayed a good friend. I kept my passport for frequent travel. And Yeah, there's just so much good things happening. Like every time I want a new Marvel show is coming out, I'm famously not a comic book writer. I'm famously not a comic book reader, but you guys always have primer episodes that go into everything about like the comics that you guys people need to know. You do great analysis of stuff. Sometimes where I want to, like, I watched it, and so now I really want to talk about it with people. Other times where someone's like, "Oh, you need to watch season 3 of this," and I'm like, "But I don't want to watch seasons 1 and 2." I just listened to your coverage of season 1 and 2, and it gets me up there, and it's fantastic. And you have so many different people on the network who bring so much different perspectives. And one of the best ones, you actually reminded me of this because you talked about her on a recent episode of Starfleet, the Star Trek Universe podcast. Ashley Coffin is one of your regular co-hosts, has such great perspectives. She's a professional hairstylist, among other things. And she does such good analysis on like the wigs and the hair and what you can learn about that. And it's just a fantastic set of voice to bring, as well as she and I would always often do thirst cast when we were talking about like the different characters who were attractive and things like that. When I was on those shows. Great stuff. Check out all of that. And I did remember the thing I was going to say before is not only did we have the first bathroom mention on Academy, we also had, I think this has started on some of the other new Trek shows, but there was a lot of it here, a lot of cursing. And that's just because TV has changed.
Oh, yeah.
It's different. But also, Star Trek, in part because there was network television in the 90s and other things like that, but also there was a real campy, family-friendly vibe. Like, we knew people were, like, hooking up, but it was very fade to black.
Yeah, for sure.
There is a, like, it's CW naked, so like you don't see, you know, like,
man, I don't know that one scene, Caleb and Tarima get it on, and there's like
the most erotic scene I have seen, like,
in Star Trek.
I would not want to watch that with my mother. Like,
this is the problem. Like, I love that scene. It's sexy as fuck, but it kind of gave me a little bit of parent problem because I started watching the show with my niece who I took in a few years ago, and we watched the first couple episodes and she loves it. Absolutely loves it. That first episode, she is in love with Caleb Meir. She thinks he is the best, and she is she even likes his new haircut once they give him a haircut. She was upset about it, but shit grew on her.
She also have an ethical issue, a white-run institution forcing a black man to cut
I know.
That was a whole question we never got into.
That is a whole thing. Yeah. They play it for comedy, and it is very funny. But I agree with you. But anyway, the entire thing about like the sex scene, I was just like, I really love this, and my niece is loving it. I'm watching every episode, and then I'm like, episode 5 or 6, they just have this like really explicit sex scene where they're fully showing. I mean, they're not showing everything, but they show a lot of side boob, a lot of like no nudity, but
on top of him, it's very clear what's happening.
Very clear what's happening, and it's really hot. And I was like, man, I do not want to watch this scene with my niece. There's no part of me that wants to I'm like have to put this scene on and like leave the room.
Yeah.
She's 15. She can handle it, I think, but it's like,
yeah, this is a censorship issue. It's just an awkward issue.
Yeah, it's just an awkward thing.
No, like I said, I love watching Star Trek with my mother. That is the only Star Trek scene I've ever seen where I'm like, I'm, you know, my mother's passed away a number of years ago, but I would be like, Mom, you should watch this episode on your own.
Yeah, the other Star Trek scene that made it like, I don't know if I can watch this with a kid, is in Discovery, they have a scene where they like kill a bloodline of Klingons. They're faking it, but we don't know that at the time, and they hold up baby heads. Yeah. The Klingons like hold up the heads of the babies they killed, and it is dark, and I was like, oh my gosh. And like I was like, I don't know that I could watch that with a kid. Like that's a extra violent, dark scene, and then you find out later they faked it. But it's like you don't know that when you're watching it.
Doubly funny because I recently talked on my other podcast, Star Wars Generations podcast. There's an episode of the Clone Wars, a kids show, where Darth Maul at the time decapitates a number of people, and I think a head is held up. I mean, it's pretty gruesome. So yeah, I get you. All right. Anyway, I'm going to end this show. Matt, you're great to talk to you, but we are so on tangent patrol. That's all the ways to find Matt and his great stuff. Of course, I am the Ethical Panda. You can find me at theethicalpanda.com or go to truestory.com. Please let people know. We want to bring more people in the conversation. We want to get more questions we can talk to. If you like the show, share it with a friend. Come into our Discord. Talk to us about the shows there. Definitely give Starfleet Academy a watch. It is a different tone. Some people it may not be your favorite tone. It grew on me, but it asks just so many great questions, so many things to discuss, and we need more television like this, and we need the Ellisons to not control television. So on behalf of myself and Matt, thank you all so much. May the force be with you.